All right, this is the Voice of Motown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
And I'm Brandon Cork, and this is a WVU Sports podcast by two suffering WVU fans.
All right, well, the West Virginia Mountaineers lose to Texas by the score of 38-20, and that score doesn't even really do justice to how one-sided this game really was. The Mountaineers were down 28-0 at one point in the second quarter, also down 35-7 at one point in the third quarter. So, the game was never really that close. And the Mountaineers just seemed to be outclassed on both sides of the ball. The loss kind of reminds me, it's very reminiscent of the Baylor loss last season. The big difference is Baylor was a powerhouse last year. They even ended up winning the Big 12. Whereas this Texas team, although they're loaded with talent, they were 2-2 heading into this game, just like the Mountaineers. And their coach, the program, it was all being criticized by their own media. So it wasn't like this was a red hot team the Mountaineers were facing. And, if we're being honest, Texas will more than likely end up somewhere in the middle of the pack of the Big 12. So although it reminds me of the Baylor game, this game seems, more disappointing than that loss. So just an absolute thumping. The optimism for this season seems to be at an all-time low at this moment. So what are your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the season, I definitely thought this game would be a loss. Texas definitely has a lot of talent this year. But, after the game and during the game even, I was still incredibly upset with how we lost and losing that game because I felt like, coming in, Texas wasn't playing great. They had flaws that could be exploited. I felt like it could be a close game. I didn't think that we would go in there and get blown out. I didn't think that we would go in there and be embarrassed. But that's exactly what happened. And it does remind me of the Baylor game a little bit too, but also reminds me in a lot of ways as well as the Texas Tech game last year where we just didn't show up for the first half at all. We were down 17-0. We came back. We came close to tying that game up, winning the game. It wasn't to be. But this year it's different. This year, we have more talent than we have last year, at least on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, you can argue, obviously the secondary is much worse, but the front seven, is probably better. But on all aspects of the game, we just got dominated for at least the first quarter. The second half or second quarter, things got a little bit better, but it was more just, stopping the bleeding and slowing it down more than just us getting better. Overall, going into the game, I would have been okay with us losing if we didn't lose like that. And I think I'm just tired of losing like that, going into games where, you have some expectations and then the team just doesn't come out like they're ready to play. I'm tired of watching football teams that do that because it's inexcusable, especially for a coach who's been there for 4 years.
I'm with you. I don't think any Mountaineer fan is super disappointed in that we lost the game. It's just, in the way we lost it. It was never a competition. We looked, stop me if you've heard this before. We were a team that was undisciplined. They had a penalty on offense before they even snapped the ball one single time. They only finished the game with 4 penalties, but, a penalty like that can definitely set a tone to start the game where you're already backing yourself up 5 yards. And that's not the first time it's happened. Like before the Neal Brown era, I can't even think of one. I'm sure it has happened, but I can't even think of one single time where that has happened. And the reason we remember it for Neal Brown is because it seems to happen a handful of times every year with his teams. I just don't get it. But not only was that one of the 4 penalties, the defense had a penalty on Texas when they had 1st and 20, and it was an automatic first down penalty. There was another penalty when Texas had a 2nd and 20, and WVU gave them an automatic first down. So, I mean, they're just so boneheaded, so costly at critical times when you could have got that ball back and maybe got some momentum. And just overall, WVU just didn't look prepared throughout the entire game. Questionable play calls, like early on, I think it was the second drive of the game, 3rd and 2. We ran a play action, and the ball was dropped by Mike O'Loughlin. He took a nasty hit to the knee, so it could have been converted. But if you got a 2nd and 2 in Texas territory. Why not run CJ Donaldson twice if you have to? I mean, he'll probably get it on the first one, but if you have to, just run him twice, because then on fourth down, they throw the ball again. So that I don't know, that just blows my mind. Secondary was god awful. Again, just like the Kansas game, card was thrown to guys who seemed to be wide open by 5 yards. At least it seemed like, just very frustrating. And in a game that WVU and Neal Brown had 9 days to prepare for, it's just really hard to find positives after seeing a game like that.
Yeah, I mean, there really aren't too many, especially because we haven't made any changes, especially on that, back end of the secondary, at least wholesale changes. I mean, I think the only switch that we've made all season is we moved Lance Dixon to safety and started playing X3 Low as starting linebacker, and then playing Jacoby Spells a little bit more, but still playing Ajayi and McCormick a majority of the snaps in the secondary, still playing Cox and Floyd a majority of the snaps at safety. And these are guys who are, been playing football for 5-6 years now, and they continue to get burnt. And it's no slight to them. It's just on the coaches. We watch, they're watching it more than we are. They're watching film, multiple times a week. They're watching it on their own. They're watching it with the players. They're watching it, during team sessions. They're going over the plays that happened in the game before in practice to help people correct, or at least that's what they should be doing, because, that's what high school teams do. But they're seeing all of this, and they're still making the cognizant decision to say, hey, these are the guys that we're still going to trot out there. And when we see some of these younger guys, these guys we aren't seeing a lot, start getting snaps in the second half, you see improvement. And I think, to me, that's the most frustrating thing about the defense. And then on offense, which, we can talk about more in depth here in a second, just the play distribution, the game plan. I mean, everything about the game, in my opinion, was just coaching related. And part of it was the motivation to come out there and play Texas with a little bit of an edge. And you could see that Texas went completely opposite of what I said last week, where I said Texas didn't give a shit. They actually did, and they played really hard. They played really physical. They brought it to West Virginia. They were hitting hard almost every time they had the opportunity to, and they wanted to win that game. And West Virginia didn't come with that mentality. So all of that, I really don't put onto the players, because it's the coaches who need to get them in that mindset. It's the coaches who need to put the players in the right positions. It's the coaches who need to put the right players on the field. And it's the coaches who need to drop the game plan and prepare people to go out there and at least play a competitive football game.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of blame to go around with the, coaches and players. But here's the reason why, I'm going to put most of the blame on the coaches. It's that we're 3.5 years into this administration, and it's just the same stuff over and over again. And after some time, I mean, that's the coaches. Players come and go in college football. It's the coaches who aren't changing, and that's why we're getting the same results. Neal Brown gave himself some breathing room after that Virginia Tech win, but I think it's safe to say he's right back in the hot seat. Virginia Tech got absolutely destroyed again. This time it was North Carolina. I believe the score was like 41-10. And so I think that really just proved that Virginia Tech's a bad team. So that was not a quality win. I think most people knew that even at the time, but it looks even worse now. And then you have that performance against Texas. And I keep hearing excuses from some of the fans. I don't want to hear Texas has a bunch of 4 and 5 star guys and WVU has a bunch of 3-star guys. So, and that's the only reason
That's
why
always been the case.
What's that?
That's always the case. We're always.
That's what I was about to say. Like, stop making excuses for poor performances. West Virginia has had success against Texas for this past decade. And like you said, that's always been the case. They've always had higher recruits than WVU. So don't give me that excuse. Heck, we beat Texas last season with almost the same players on that Texas squad. So I don't understand why some fans will do these mental gymnastics to create excuses for, yet another disappointing game by a Neal Brown team. I mean, we beat them. WVU beat them last year, and they still had Robinson. They still had Worthy. They still had Card throwing the ball. So don't give me that excuse. That was a game they could have won, or they could have at least put up a performance that wasn't embarrassing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think to kind of put it into perspective too, is to think about it this way. Last year we were playing games with Jared Deggy, and we know Jared Deggy's limitations. We know his story after he's left WVU, how, he wasn't able to win a starting job at Western Kentucky. He wasn't able to do it at Troy. I think he's getting an opportunity now, but we brought in JT Daniels, who's one of the top rated kids coming out of high school. Went to USC, played well there. Went to Georgia, played well there when he was healthy. Came here, he's played well. And the biggest concern that we had over last year was our quarterback, our offense stalling out and not putting up numbers. Daniels comes and fixes that. Yet, looking at it with JT Daniels, we're 2-3. If Garrett Green were starting every game this season against one of the worst Power 5 teams in all of college football in Virginia Tech and an FCS school, we'd probably still be 2-3 with Garrett Green or Nico Marchio or Will Crowder. So we're wasting the talent of someone who is on the same level as a Will Grier. And we saw what Dana Holgorsen did whenever he had that elite talent at quarterback. He also had elite talent at wide receiver, which I think this team does too. He also didn't have a fantastic defense. He had a solid defense, but it wasn't without its weaknesses either. But he was still winning games, 8 games. And I think most of us thought he underperformed there, but there's no way in hell we're going to make 8 wins this year. And we have a very similar situation to those years when Dana Holgorsen had Will Grier and crew.
Yeah, I'm with you. Quick side note, did you see Jared Dagey had a nice big comeback for Troy?
I did, yeah. And I heard he's going to be competing for that starting job now. So good for him. I mean, I think it was a tough situation coming in there so late.
I'm with you. I'm happy for him. I'm glad he's finding success. But I can't agree more with what you're saying. I mean, JT Daniels is for us just praising Dagey. He's without a doubt head and shoulders better than him. But however, if he was our starting quarterback this year, we'd probably have the same exact record. So, I mean, you make a great point there. And, it's just disappointing. It does feel like you're wasting a great talent there. But I mean, look at some of the decisions to start that game. WVU threw the ball 8 out of the first 9 plays, which resulted in 2 punts to start the game. Whose decision was it to completely ignore the run game to start? I'm fine if you want to go pass heavy, pass more than run, but 8 out of 9 plays to start the game, that's just ridiculous, especially when it's resulting in punts. 2 first downs in the first 4 drives. You would think that when that blew up in your face on the first drive that you wouldn't come out with that strategy on the second drive. It's just very head-scratching decisions, which brings up the question, Jordan Leslie, Graham Harrell, you were bringing this up the other day. How much of the blame is to go to those 2 guys for ineffective game planning? Because, they've kind of proven themselves to be competent coordinators. Harold has had a good stretch of games up until the Texas game. He's got a decent track record prior to WVU. Leslie has had teams that have way overperformed, it seems like, in the past few years. And so I feel like they've proven that they're competent coaches. So why, I don't know, how much blame do you think they should get for this bad start to the season?
I see that's kind of what I don't understand about how the coaching structure works at WVU, because, in a normal college football environment, or any football environment, you would kind of lean on your coordinators, your position coaches to be the guys who are saying, these are who my starters are. This is who should be starting at corner, says the secondary coach. Here's who should be starting at safety, says the safeties coach, etc., down through the line. I'm not sure who has the final say in that. And if it's, for example, Jordan Leslie deciding to trot out those 5 guys in the secondary every game who constantly underperformed, then, it's on him. If it's him who's the one who's, playing conservative at times, and it's not at the direction of the coach, then it's on him. But it's also on him too if Neal Brown is telling him to, okay, play conservative here, and he's listening to it too, because he can always say no. Obviously, you don't want to be insubordinate, but I think it's a tricky situation. I feel like a lot of the things that we do have kind of Neal Brown's fingerprints on them, because you think of him as a kind of a conservative coach. You think of him around time of possession and trying to game plan the whole game around that idea of possessing the ball, keeping the ball out of the other team's hands, not allowing big plays and things like that. And I just wonder how much of his fingerprints get put onto game plans with Jordan Leslie and Graham Harrell. Maybe it's just a conspiracy theory, because I just have so many question marks about Neal Brown. But it's really confusing to me that we have two coordinators who have shown that they know what they're doing, and yet there are times where they just look completely incompetent. So I'm completely lost.
Well, here's the other thing I wouldn't have mind someone asking Neal Brown after the game. We all know their first drive or two scripted. Who scripted 8 throws out of 9 plays? Was that JT Daniels audibling into that? Is he changing it at the play, at the line of scrimmage? Is Neal Brown wanting to do that? Is that Graham's call? I would have loved for someone to ask him that at the press conference, because it might seem like it's not that important since WVU basically got blown out. But you know what? If you score on those first 2 possessions and keep it close, maybe the defense has a little momentum. Maybe the offense doesn't feel a need to be playing catch up from the get-go. And that could have changed the whole mindset of that entire game.
I think part of the reasoning for the pass-heavy attack was what Texas Tech did to Texas. They put up a lot of yards. They really picked them apart. But I feel like what the game plan was, and again, this kind of feels like it has Neal Brown's fingerprints on it, is that they only took half of what worked for Texas Tech. While Texas Tech passed the ball a lot, they played fast. They played no huddle. They went up and, they didn't give Texas time to rest. They didn't give Texas time to set. And, you look at how many plays Texas faced that game. I think it was close to 100, if not over 100, in that overtime win against Texas. WVU didn't start playing up tempo until late in the second quarter, and that was because we were down 28. I feel like if you want to pass the ball as much as we did on the opening drive, then go up tempo. You can't control the clock. You can't do the time of possession thing that Neal Brown loves to do, and that's why, I wonder if there's a compromise made where Graham Harrell says, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to go pass heavy. This will work against Texas. We need to play fast. And Neal says, I don't want to go 3 and out quick. I want to give our defense a break. Let's slow it down a little bit. We'll run your plays, but we need to do it at my pace. I don't know if that actually happens, but it's something that sounds logical to me.
Yeah. I mean, I could see that. And really everything we're talking about right now, it brings up the question, what if Neal Brown is fired at some point? Because, I don't see Coach Brown being fired in the middle of the season just because of his $20 million buyout. It's hard to imagine WVU forking over that money. But, donors do have a big say, and I'm sure they're getting just as frustrated as all the other fans are. And his buyout at the end of the season is $16.7 million. And I mean, look around college football right now. Good and bad coaches are getting fired lately. The firing of Nebraska's Scott Frost, Colorado's Carl Durrell, I mean, those make sense. But even guys like Wisconsin's Paul Chryst are getting axed early in the season, and he was 67-26 at Wisconsin. So, I mean, he had a pretty good run the past year or two. I mean, they still had winning records, but maybe it was a little, underperforming. But I mean, WVU would love to have that record over the last few years. So I don't know. I don't like programs that do a coaching carousel, and every couple of years they're firing people. That doesn't lead to success. But I mean, it's been nearly 4 years, and we're just not seeing any positive progress here at West Virginia. So I don't know. I just refuse to believe WVU has lowered its standards to what those other programs are doing. So I don't know. From what I'm hearing, Neal Brown's job is safe almost no matter what. I'm hearing that from some people who do have inside information. So I don't know. What do you think? Is his job safe even if he loses out?
It shouldn't be. I mean, it's just that simple. I think, again, regardless of how we started off the season, I think you need to still at least 7 wins. I said that at the beginning of the season. I still say it now. And I know it's harder now, but you still have to finish with 7 wins because you have JT Daniels, you have Bryce Ford-Wheaton, you have Dante Stills, you have all this talent that is, leaving in the next year. JT Daniels should be back, but who knows? After kind of a train wreck season, if he has another year of eligibility for free, who's to say he comes back? Um, and I think context matters too. Neal Brown's been here for 4 years, and people make a lot of excuses on how Dana left the cover bare for him, but he's had 4 years to rebuild the team. If he hasn't done it by now, it's his fault. But you also look at Leipold and at Kansas. You look at Aranda and Baylor. Even Matt Campbell, Iowa State. You have all these teams who took over really bad situations. I mean, people don't talk about Baylor at like a hard situation, but after all those sanctions, after Bryles got fired, I mean, that was an entire rebuild from the ground up, and Aranda did it. Did a fantastic job at it. Leipold took a bottom feeder, and now they're undefeated. Sonny Dykes even 1 year at TCU, they're undefeated. In today's college football, with the transfer portal, with you're able to make a competitive team and turn things around quickly. And Neal Brown has said all the right things. He's done all the recruiting and bringing in the right guys, it seems like. It's just the execution part that he's failing on, and that is the most important thing. If you can't execute and you still can't do it 4 years from now, and you're not showing improvement on your execution, I don't think year 5 is going to be any better.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, even look at Texas Tech. I mean, they're only 3-2, but you know what? They beat Texas, and they have a better record than the Mountaineers right now, and they got a first-year head coach as well. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense that all these other programs in the Big 12 are having success, but we, have to settle and accept where we're at. But, which brings this up. You were asking this question to me the other day. There hasn't been a firing in West Virginia football in quite a while. So do you want to inform the audience on that info?
Sure. So the last coach actually officially fired by WVU, was Frank Signetti Sr. in 1979. So what is that? Over 40 years since WVU has actually fired a coach. And another thing I want to read out is, a tweet that we sent out the other day, just to kind of, again, put into context, is that the worst 4-year stretches at WVU have been from 58 to 61. They only won 30% of their games. That was really early on. Signetti's 4-year stretch from 76 to 79, where he only won 38% of his games and was fired in 79. The later Nealon years from 98 to 2001, where he went 22 and 24, which isn't terrible, just under 500. And it just kind of goes to show you how stable of a program West Virginia is. But right now, Neal Brown, over his last 4 years, sits right under Nealon with a 47.5% win percentage. And he would need to finish 4-3 to finish better, to finish outside the top 3 and pass Nealon's 48% win percentage during the tail end of his career. So, it just kind of goes to show, for context, that WVU, for as much of an excuse people make for it, for being a tough state to recruit, for not having the money, for not having the resources, for not having the 5 stars, we've always remained competitive throughout college football without those things. And Neal Brown, I think, has brought in probably better players. He's been given better practice facilities, a great locker room, a lot of great selling points for players, and he still can't get over that 500 hump that WVU has consistently had over 4-year periods for its entire history.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, all the way up to 01, that would even include Rich Rod's first year. So that was like the last 3 years of Nealon, which weren't great, and then Rich Rod's first year. And Neal Brown's even doing worse than that stretch. It's just very, very disappointing. And like we keep saying, if progress was being made, if we saw things, ascending, we would be okay with this, but it just doesn't feel that way. It feels like we've kind of plateaued and we're just staying in the same spot. Like we're just not getting better in a lot of areas, not in enough areas to win at least. And so this all leads to the question, how will WVU finish this season? How many Big 12 games do you think they are going to win this year? And you threw out the number. You said the over under is 1.5 wins, which it's pretty sad that that's even the number we're throwing out. But if you had to guess, how many Big 12 wins are we getting this year? Is it over or under 1.5?
Man, it's tough. I mean, so what we have: Texas Tech, Baylor, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Kansas State. Yeah. I mean, I can see us winning one. I mean, I don't think we're beating Oklahoma, even though Oklahoma is underperforming. I don't think we're beating Baylor. I think we can win one of Texas Tech, Kansas State, TCU, even though TCU's been better. But I don't think we can win all three. I mean, those are the three most winnable games. We're not beating Oklahoma State. So, yeah, it's between those three, and TCU's look good. Texas Tech, who knows? Kansas State, they can be great or they can be average. I think that they're better than what they look like when they got beat by Kansas, and Kansas is better than what they look like. So I have a hard time seeing us beat Kansas State. I'm going to have to say one, and that really pains me to say because we should be able to easily win at least 3 games, I think, for the rest of the season, but I don't know.
I'll go over, and I don't even know where we're getting those bare minimum 2 wins because I also said we'd beat Texas last week. So I'm just thinking with my fan bind right now and not really thinking common sense. But the reality of it is WVU is without a doubt the worst team in the Big 12 as of right now, which is kind of sad to say. It seems like West Virginia has a better team this year than we did last year. Their offense is without question better. However, their defense is much worse. So when you sum up the entire team, it begs the question, are we really better than we were last year as a whole? Is the competition really that much harder this year in the Big 12? Maybe. I mean, Kansas has improved. WVU didn't play, a lot of bad teams out of conference. Although you could make the argument we did. We played an FCS school in Virginia Tech, who's god awful this year. So I'm not even sure you can really lean on a weak non-conference schedule. It just feels like, excuses are being made at this point. So after 4 years, I just want to see results. I feel like the fan base has been patient. I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to see Neal Brown, field a incompetent team week after week. Saturday was absolutely embarrassing. So does anybody have confidence heading into this Thursday night game against Baylor? Me and you will be there. We'll be rooting for the team, but unless this secondary does a 180, I don't see how the Mountaineers can walk out as winners.
No, I don't see it either. And I haven't really dug into Baylor yet. We'll do that kind of more in depth next week. But I mean, just showing what WVU has out there. I mean, would it shock me that WVU went in there and won the game? A little, but it wouldn't shock me based on the talent. It would shock me because of the coaching staff, or Neal Brown in particular. I think we have the talent to beat Baylor. I think offensively we can hang with them. I think defensive line, we have enough up there to disrupt things that Baylor wants to do. But I mean, it's just putting it all together. I mean, football is 2 sides of the ball. It's several groupings of people who all kind of do different things, and it's all, a synchronized choreographic dance that's supposed to look beautiful on the field and work and do great things and score touchdowns and stop the other team from playing. And there's no synchronization. There's no, ballet out there that's being done by the coaching staff that makes the product out there work and makes other teams have to work to defend us or work to beat us. And that's just a real big issue. I mean, it would, the worst case scenario in my mind is, like you said, if Neal Brown isn't in fear of losing his job all year this year, is, we play spoiler and we lose out coming into Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State maybe is in contention for a playoff spot, and we somehow pull that upset off and then just screw the Big 12 even more for, having a college football playoff spot. I mean, that's kind of how I could see things playing out, because that's how hot and cold Neal Brown teams can be. He hangs around with teams he has no business doing, and never pulls off the win, but plays down the teams that he should beat. And it's just kind of the same story every year, every game.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So let's switch gears a little bit. Before we go any further, we need to acknowledge the CJ Donaldson injury. Late in the third quarter, CJ took a knee to the head and was motionless on the field for several minutes. According to many reports, he was unconscious after the play. Just a very scary scene for how long he was down. Just looking at the reaction of all of his teammates and even Texas players, it was just very scary to watch, even just on TV. We do kind of have some good news. He was eventually, cut out of his jersey and his pads, stretchered off. They took real good care of him. He did regain consciousness, gave the crowd a thumbs up, but I'm not going to lie, it still looked kind of bad when he was given that thumbs up. It looked like he could barely hold up his hand. But luckily, from everything we've been hearing, he's got full use of his arms, his legs. He was able to fly back with the team to West Virginia. And, obviously Neal Brown announced he's going to miss the Baylor game, but, he does have a concussion. You don't want to make light of that, but it looked like we were going to get a lot worse news. So, I don't know. I don't want to say that, it's good to hear, but at the same time, it seemed like we were possibly going to get worse news.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, he's moving around. Being a Steeler fan, watching the Ryan Shazier hit happen kind of live on TV when that happened was, probably one of the most disturbing things to ever witness on TV, and kind of seeing CJ laying on the ground and them doing things that you outlined to him to get him onto that stretcher, kind of makes you think that something like that could have been in the realm of possibilities, and you never want to see that. And it wasn't like he was being reckless with it either. He was just playing football. He wasn't leading with the crown of his helmet. He was down on the ground when it happened. So as much as I would love to have him on the football field, I'd be fine if he sat out the rest of the year. I mean, I want him to be 100%. I want him to be healthy. That's the most important thing that anyone should want. You kind of have to feel bad for, the Texas player too, who did that, because that weighs on them too. I mean, he didn't intentionally try to hurt CJ. It was just kind of a freak play. So, it also hurt watching, seeing how much CJ meant and how scared some of those other players were, the respect that Texas showed by, obviously you take a knee when someone's injured, but, they were really respectful during that time. The Texas were respectful. It's great to see, the support that he had. And it's just something that you don't want to ever see happen again. And I hope him a speedy recovery, not necessarily to come back to the football team, but just so he can, get back to being a human and doing what humans do,
Yeah, just get back to normal, hopefully. And it looks like they're handling it the right way. CJ put out a statement saying that he was okay, but he was going to be off social media for a while. I'm sure that's because, you shouldn't be on screens a lot when you have a concussion. It sounds like he's doing all the right things. So that's good to hear. And hopefully whenever he comes back, he's hopefully back to 100%. But it just shows what a weird sport football is, because although, a knee to the head is always a nasty thing to see, it seems like you see, 100 hits over the weekend that look way more devastating than that one was. And it just shows you that, you just never know what hit can be really damaging. And it's just a reminder, this is just a game, and you never want to see that on either side.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
All right, guys. So let's try to get past that, and so let's talk about the offense a little bit more. Just break down how everyone performed. JT Daniels, it was kind of similar to how he started the Virginia Tech game. He looked off again to start. Just wasn't exactly putting the ball where it needed to be for his guys to make clean catches. So it's a little concerning to see that 2 games in a row. Obviously, Virginia Tech, he bounced back, but Texas, um, at the end of the day, he had an okay stat line, but 5.3 yards per attempt, that's not great. Overall, JT played all right. Unfortunately, with the way our defense has been playing this year, he needs to be way better than all right for us to even have a shot at winning games. So, what did you think of JT Daniels' performance?
Yeah, I think, it was an average game for him. I think an above average game for a lot of other QBs. Um, I thought, the receivers didn't help him a lot, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But, there were some passes too, in particular that in that third down, fourth down series that you talked about, where it was 3rd and 2, 4th and 2, I felt like those drops weren't 100% on the receiver. I felt like JT could have put the ball in a better spot so that they wouldn't have gotten creamed. Um, and there were a few other instances like that early in the game. Obviously, he cleaned that up a little bit towards, later in the game. But that was really my only gripe, was his ball placement was a little shaky early on. There were some passes he overthrew. There were some balls where, if he puts the ball down a little bit, if he puts the ball outside a little bit, it gives the receiver a better chance to come down with it. And that's really the difference between a really, really good quarterback and an elite quarterback. I think that JT Daniels has the ability to be elite, but I still think he's really, really good. So I'm not going to nitpick too much because you can't really put the loss on him. I think it was just the whole kind of offense kind of swimming through molasses in that Texas game.
I'm with you. Here's a question I thought was worth asking, just to see what your thoughts were on it. By all accounts, everyone is saying the plan is for JT to come in one season, play here, and then go to the NFL. With how he's playing, and like we keep saying, JT is very good, and this probably isn't his fault. I mean, he's getting about 200 some yards a game. He has some you know, times he's missing throws that should be easy throws. Do you think it would be a good idea for him to enter the draft if the season keeps going the way it is? Because do you see him being a high draft pick if he plays the rest of the year just putting up 200 yards a game and us not winning a lot of games?
No, I think this year would be a bad year to do it. It'd be different if he was, lighting up the scoreboards, and I think his numbers are fine. I think if you look at what he is working with and you dig into it, you can make a case for him as kind of like a late round guy. But I don't think he wants to be a late round guy. I mean, I just don't think that makes sense. Um, and plus, this year's kind of loaded with pretty solid quarterbacks. And, you have obviously the two big ones with CJ Stroud. You have Bryce Young, even though he just got banged up, but you have a lot of kind of risers. Where's Jalen Daniels going to go? He's draft eligible. If he wanted to go pro after this year, he's definitely going to go higher than JT. You have the kid from Clemson who's playing better, who's draft eligible. He would probably go higher than JT because of his athleticism. You have the kid from Florida who's an athletic freak. If he chooses to go, he'll probably go higher than JT. So, I mean, there's probably at least 8 quarterbacks right who would go before him. And when you're talking 8 quarterbacks drafted ahead of you, you're talking about being drafted maybe in the 5th round at the earliest. And at that point, if you feel like you have the talent to be a first 3-round pick, you should really come back another year and see what you can do better. Because worst case scenario, you just drop 2 rounds and basically get to pick what team you play for.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, there's still 7 games left. So, I mean, maybe he gets hot and starts putting up some really, really good stats that, could change scouts' minds. As we all know, all you have to do is have like 2 or 3 hot games at the end of the year and scouts start, overhyping or, hyping where you should be. So we don't know. This could all change. But like I said, if he stays at the stats he's getting to the end of the year, I'm kind of with you. I think it would benefit him to come back one more year and maybe have, like a Gina Smith year where, he gets a bunch of hype, a bunch of noise around him, and then people want to draft him in the first 3 rounds. But I just thought that would be worth mentioning because it's not too often you see a quarterback only putting up 200 yards a game and go in the first couple rounds of the NFL draft.
Yeah, not nowadays. No way.
No. So let's move on from JT. Let's talk about the running backs a little bit. We'll start with Tony Mathis. I thought he had another rough outing, just 24 yards on 12 carries. He did have a touchdown, but in your opinion, why is Tony having such a bad start to this season? Because it seems like we keep saying the same thing lately about him. They give him a lot of carries, but he's not doing what we thought he could do this year.
So I think, Graham Harrell runs a different offense than what Neal Brown does. Last year we were running a lot of kind of, power runs with a lot of pulling. We ran a lot of split zone. This year, I feel like it's a lot more zone running, which is, you have to make a decision quick, hit the hole. Last year, our running worked because, Mathis would be able to get into one-on-one situations that he could win. I feel like the system that we're running now isn't really necessarily about getting in those one-on-one situations. It's about creating space. And you can see that, when Tony hits the hole, he just doesn't have that extra gear that he can hit like a Justin Johnson or a CJ Donaldson. Once you hit that hole, getting to the second level quick, making that decision and kind of bursting through it. CJ is great when, the things are kind of muddled around him. He can lower his shoulder, run through that way. Kind of like what Letty was. Letty was really good in tight spaces. If he got in the open field, he wasn't really going to do much in the open field. He was going to get tackled eventually. Where, Justin Johnson and CJ Donaldson are much more guys who excel in open space. And that kind of made me start thinking too about, how the stats compare because, obviously Mathis's numbers, when you look at them at face value, are better than Justin Johnson's. Obviously CJ is better than both of them, but these are the two guys we're going to have for a while going forward. Because, looking at the numbers going after this game, you have Justin Johnson, who had 107 yards after contact, 4 10-plus yard runs, 4 forced missed tackles, 187 yards on 4.7 yards per attempt, and that's on 40 attempts. Tony Mathis so far this season had 165 yards after contact, 7 10-plus yard runs, 11 forced missed tackles on 70 attempts, which accumulated 296 yards rushing on 4.2 yards per carry. So, I mean, looking at it, it seems like Tony's doing a pretty solid job. But his stats are really kind of weighted by that Tosin game. Remember, he had 100 yards rushing. He had a really solid game. So if you look at both their stats without Tosin, Justin Johnson ends up having 106 yards after contact, which is only 1 yard less than what he had with Tosin. Still 4 plus 10-yard runs, still 4 forced missed tackles on 32 attempts, 166 yards rushing on 5.2 yards per attempt. So his yards per attempt actually went up by a half a yard compared to Mathis, who without Tosin has 125 yards after contact, which is 40 yards less, 3 10-plus yards runs, which is 4 less 10-plus yards run. He had 4 10-plus yard runs against Tosin alone, 7 forced missed tackles, on 53 attempts, 165 yards rushing, which is 1 less than Justin Johnson without Tosin, on 3.1 yards per carry, which is 2.1 yards per carry less than Justin Johnson without Tosin. So I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to share it because I think it shows that Justin Johnson is just a much more effective back for the system that they're running. Obviously, Tony Mathis is going to have to step up to kind of handle that power role that CJ is not going to be able to fill for a while. But I think that Justin Johnson has shown and has earned the lead back role now that CJ's out. I want to see him starting, and I want to see him taking, 60% of the snaps, kind of like what Tony was doing earlier in the season.
I agree with you. I would like to see Justin Johnson taking the lead role as well. In fact, he was one of the few bright spots on offense during the Texas game. He had 42 yards on 10 carries and a touchdown. And he just seems to, he just keeps improving. So the more touches he gets. So I would love to see his role increase. And obviously it will with CJ out. But I'm with you. I would like to see Tony and Justin's carries kind of flip. I would like to see Justin getting a majority of those touches where, Tony's coming in to be kind of the change of pace back. And it will be interesting to see how they use those two with CJ out. I think it'll be very telling of who's going to be teamed up with CJ once he comes back healthy for possibly the rest of their careers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think worst case scenario in my mind is that this coaching staff does what they have shown the tendency to do over the years, and that's just play the experienced guy. I mean, Tony has the experience. He seems to have more trust in the coaching staff. I mean, the coaching staff could have benched him and moved him to third string after that fumble, even though it was only one fumble. And I agree that he shouldn't have been benched. But I mean, there's some coaching staffs out there. You fumble once, you're falling a couple spots in the depth chart. You have to earn your way back. And he's still getting kind of lead back roles. He played the entire first series for WVU. But I hope that now that CJ's out, that they're not just going to say, okay, now Tony, you're going to get 70% of the snaps. You're going to take your role and CJ's role, and Justin, you're just going to kind of get scraps. It worries me kind of the way that they're treating the secondary and how they choose what players play there. I'm really hoping that isn't indicative of the way that they're going to treat this backfield moving forward.
Yeah, and let's talk about CJ Donaldson's performance before his injury. He had 9 yards on 4 carries, but that's not a great sample size either. He had 4 touches in the first half, 3 handoffs, 1 catch. That's just mind-blowing to me. I know he kind of left the Virginia Tech game early because I think he hurt his hand, if I'm remembering correctly, something like that. And so maybe that had something to do with it. But he's possibly your best weapon on offense, and he touches the ball 4 times in the first half, in a half that, you were losing by 28 points. And I don't know, explain that one to me. I guess, again, if he was hurt, that's a good excuse. But other than that, I just can't figure out why they didn't try to utilize him more in that game.
Yeah, I mean, even if they wanted to go pass heavy, I think CJ Donaldson is the best pass blocker we have on the team. And, with his experience as a receiver and tight end in high school, there's no reason to not have him out there, running some routes too. So trying to get him involved, even if you're going pass heavy, I mean, when you have someone like that, it's just kind of odd that the only way that we're willing to get him the ball is to hand it off to him up the middle. And that volume and that, he was probably getting banged up. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago where, you kind of worry about a true freshman and how he's going to handle a season long of college football hits, and worst case scenario happens. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the coaching staff was thinking. I think they need to get more creative in ways they get him the ball though sometimes too.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. Let's talk about the wide receivers. On paper, it looked like they had a good game, but they had a lot of drops. 7, I think I heard Neal Brown say in his press conference. And they had a lot of yards, but I think a lot of them were gained in the second half when Texas was just letting them dink and dunk their way down the field and, basically wasting all their clock. Bryce Ford-Wheaton and Sam James made some nice plays, but they also had some drops that, kind of make you forget about those chunk plays that they had. So what did you think about the performance of the wide receivers?
As I kind of talked about earlier, I think some of the drops were on, ball placement. Obviously, great receivers are going to hang on to those tougher catches. But, obviously there's some catches out there too that they should have came down with. I mean, Pro Football Focus only credited WVU with 2 drops, but they did credit West Virginia with 13 contested targets and only coming down with 5 of those contested targets as catches. So if you want to count those 8 as drops, then you're talking about, 10 drops on the game. And, that's, part of drilling, and that's part of trying to improve your receivers' hands is, how to make catches sometimes in tough situations. I don't expect someone like, Reese Smith or even Preston Fox or Jeremiah Aaron or any of those guys to come in there and make tough catches. Even Sam James to an extent, because that's never really kind of been his game. Obviously, he wanted his hands to be better, but he's more of a field stretcher. But Bryce Ford-Wheaton and Caden Prather, I want to see those guys since they're bigger bodied, they're stronger, they're built a little bit different than the other receivers. I want to see them be able to hang on to those tougher catches more often. And, it just didn't work out that much. And the one thing I want to come back and look at, because I couldn't find it on Pro Football Focus, they didn't have the game broken down yet, is how much man Texas played versus zone. Because it seems like, the our receivers play a lot better against zone than they do man, which was interesting. I looked at targets for Bryce Ford-Wheaton and Caden Prather so far for the season. This isn't just the Texas game. I don't think it includes Texas because, like I said, the Texas man versus zone numbers aren't input yet on PFF. But Bryce Ford-Wheaton on this season has 12 targets versus man and only 3 receptions. Versus zone, he has 24 targets and 17 catches. Prather, 7 targets and 4 receptions versus man so far in the season, 20 targets and 14 catches versus zone on the season. So just some interesting numbers there to kind of show that, against man, where things are a little bit closer, you don't have as much space. Bryce Ford-Wheaton in particular is struggling. And for a smart defensive coach out there, that's something to kind of put in your back pocket if you want to shut him down, is play him tighter, play him physical, play him man-to-man, and you're going to slow him down.
Yeah, and I feel like those first couple games he was playing well against man, like a lot of contested catches, it seemed like, versus Pitt and Kansas, whereas I don't know if people have just scouted him better or if he's just having a rough patch, but these last few games he hasn't really impressed very much. I mean, he had 93 yards versus Texas, but like I said, it seemed like a lot of those were Texas was just playing really soft in the second half, letting us just gain little 5-8 yards here and there, letting the clock run. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but yeah, the drops just popped up again and it seemed to really hurt us, and that's really got to be, I mean, I know JT was missing early, but I feel like as the game went on, those drops were just guys not making plays on the ball.
I think part of it too had to be with how Texas defense came out of the game. The mentality they had, they wanted to finish plays, they wanted to hit hard. There were a couple plays in there where it looked like they, some guys may have been getting a little bit too aggressive and leading with the crown of their helmet. It never got called, and it's not that, big of a deal if they, missed some borderline calls here and there. We've talked about how confusing targeting is in its own, so we're not going to kind of, dwell on it. But, that their game plan was to go in there and be physical against us, and it worked. And I think that putting that thought in the receivers' heads kind of gets you a little bit.
Yeah.
You're making pitches and your body's getting beat up because you're putting your hands up to catch the ball. And the next thing you know, you have someone's shoulder pads and your ribs, kind of subconsciously you start thinking about that, later in the game, whenever you so you have someone bearing down on you, and you stop forgetting about the catch and you start thinking about the pain. So I wonder if that has something to do with it. And again, it's just about kind of being tough. And that's something that other teams can mimic. You don't have to be the most athletic or talented team in the world to just play physical. So as much of an excuse as it is that those big hits can take a toll, it's something that the receivers are just going to have to get used to, because teams are just going to start playing them that way if they can't adjust.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And kind of wrap up the offense, let's talk about the offensive line. I did not think they had a good day at all. I didn't bother to look up their grades, but just, the eye test from when I was watching the game. I think Neal Brown said he thought they did well pass blocking. I did not see that at all. I think they gave up 3 sacks on JT Daniels, and they weren't creating a ton of holes in the run game. So what do you think of the offensive line?
It definitely wasn't their best showing. I don't think that they were awful. I don't think that they were really average either. I definitely think below average is probably the best way to categorize it. 9 hurries and 10 pressures allowed on 54 dropbacks, which is, not great, but it could be worse. It seemed like we really struggled on the right side in pass protection. 6 of our pressures and hurries came from the right side compared to 2 from the left side. The other 2 pressures were allowed by tight ends. So, what can you expect there? Run blocking, really, the numbers across the board just looked bad. We were below 4 yards to carry, or I think almost 3. We were barely over 3 yards to carry up the middle, but everywhere else we were below 3 yards a carry, except for on the right side where we had 4 carries for 25 yards. So even though the right side was worse pass blocking, they did an okay job run blocking, only on 4 attempts, 6 yards a carry. But I mean, just not a great showing. I felt like JT did a good job navigating the pocket for the most part. Obviously, all those pressures did kind of get to him a few times, and it seemed like early on he was kind of getting a little frustrated or a little, antsy in the pocket. But I mean, overall, just it's the trend of the whole offense. It just seemed like they weren't necessarily prepared to kind of deal with some of the things Texas was throwing at them. And I mean, you could say that about every group that we had on offense as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I think this is the first game I ever noticed JT kind of having happy feet back there. I never noticed that in the previous 4 games, and it did seem like he was bouncing around, maybe throw, and I think that did contribute to some of the bad passes throughout that
Mm-hmm.
game. But just to kind of put my final thoughts on the offense, I keep saying they were dinking and dunking in the second half, and I just think that played right into the Longhorns' hands. I think that's what they were hoping West Virginia would do. On West Virginia scoring drives in the second half, one took 7.5 minutes, and the other one took nearly 6 minutes. I mean, that's a quarter right there. You already killed half of the time you have left amount of comeback. So I know you got to take what the defense gives you in those situations, but at the same time, you put yourself in a 28-point hole, and you got to find a way to get some chunk plays. I don't know. There was just no urgency in this team from start to finish to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the second half they just, like you said, took what the defense gave them. I think in the first few drives we were trying to push things a little bit more, not necessarily deep downfield, but I mean we were hitting the intermediate routes more instead of just going for those checkdowns. I mean, and honestly, I'd be okay if that's what they want to do as long as it's working. But it's situational too. I mean, if you're doing it at the beginning of the game and you continue doing it at the beginning of the game throughout the rest of the game because it's working, that's great. You're scoring points, you're happy. But, if you're trying to push the ball, you're trying to be aggressive early on in the game and it's not working, and then you're dinking and dunking when you're down by a lot. I understand kind of sticking with what's working, but eventually you got to take a shot somewhere here or there. So I can definitely see your argument there that you'd like to see a little bit more aggressiveness and even a trick play or two. I mean, I can't think of any trick plays that have ever been run during Neal's tenure. Maybe I'm not remembering something, but you have to remember Texas scored on a trick play too. They had that Xavier Worthy passing touchdown that kind of came out of nowhere, wide open to the tight end. So there's no reason why we couldn't throw in some sort of wrinkle like that when we're down by so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you make a good point there. Let's talk about the defense. So they did not have a good day. It's almost even hard to talk about. I mean, some of the stuff that really popped off the page to me was Texas averaged 12 yards per pass attempt, which is insane. That's not per completion. That's per attempt. They averaged 12 yards. And like we said earlier, Texas just had guys open by 5 or more yards nearly every time they threw it. It seemed like I've never seen anything like it. WVU's secondary looked like an FCS school. So what are your thoughts on WVU's defense?
I mean, it's just the same stuff, different day. Kind of a big difference in the game was being around the ball enough to force incompletions. The secondary, WVU secondary forced 2 incompletions. Texas had 6 forced incompletions for the game. So it just kind of shows you how active their defensive backs were compared to WVU's. Ajayi McCormick still played a majority of the snaps in the secondary. They still got cooked almost every play. And I still don't understand what the thought process is of continuing to play them. So I'm not going to really dwell on them too much more because they were bad, but we know they've been bad. Marcus Floyd and Jasir Cox, the two, whatever you call them, bandit spearbacks. Didn't really have a good game. Cox now, he missed one of his 2 tackle attempts on passing plays. He now has 4 missed tackles on the season, which is 21% missed tackle rate. He's been targeted 7 times this season. He's allowed 7 receptions. Marcus Floyd had 2 missed tackles in the game. He now has 5 missed tackles on the season, 17% missed tackle rate. He's been targeted 15 times on the season and allowed 9 receptions for 114 yards. I mean, if we want to talk about the bad, that those are the bad, and you just can't be that bad. And I definitely don't think the game plan did them any favors. I felt like there were times where maybe it was a little bit too aggressive, but there were times too where you have these 5th-year guys who have been playing college football for a very long time at different levels, and they're just screwing up fundamental things, like on that double move that McCormick gave up to Worthy. I mean, if you look at the formation, if you look at where the safeties were on it, WVU had a whole bunch of help in the middle of the field. And as soon as Worthy went for the post, I understand you don't want to give up the post, but he flipped his hips and gave Worthy his outside. And you have no help outside because you're the outside corner. It's just little things like that you have to be aware of. And if you can't do that as a 5th or 6th-year guy, you just can't be out there. Put him on kickoff team. He can still play. He just doesn't belong as on the quarterback. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to argue. Like, if you have Spells out there, if you have Wilson Lamp, you can still coach these guys up. They have several years left. They have a lot to learn. You're right. If you're like a 5th-year senior and you have 7 games in your career left, like, how much more? Obviously, you want to keep coaching, but I mean, if they haven't got it by now, then are they going to get it, hearing it for the 10th time? I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing more of these young guys getting reps. Wilson Lamp got, I think, somewhere in the 20 snaps that game.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously he had some rough patches and gave up passes as well, but I mean, that's a learning experience for him. I like that they keep playing Spells. I saw Spells get cooked a couple times too, but again, at least he's learning. At least they have film of him now. They can show it to him, show him what he's doing wrong. And hopefully these 2 younger guys can get better as the year goes on. I say, as much as you can, just keep giving the young guys reps and hope that if they don't get better this year, hopefully it makes them better players heading into next season.
Yeah, and I do want to give props to a couple players from the secondary. Aubrey Burks, he's been solid all year. He's someone who really shined in the spring game, and I was really excited to see him do this season. And he had a great game. He had 4 tackles. He only allowed 2 catches on the game. He was credited with a dropped interception. So he's been around the ball, and he's playing free safety, so he has to be the guy who kind of cleans up all these guys' messes. Hence the 4 tackles. So I just want to give him a shout out. And then, like you said, Andrew Wilson Lamp, he had a great game in the second half. According to PFF, he was only targeted once and didn't allow any receptions, although I think he was on that reception that got tipped for a touchdown catch. I think he's the one who tipped it, but I guess they didn't credit that against him, which they shouldn't. I mean, he did his best. I thought he looked good out there. I didn't mention this earlier, but I did read a snippet of an article today about the coaching staff and Andrew Wilson Lamp, because as we talked about, I believe it was in our last episode, about how Andrew Wilson Lamp was starting cornerback during the spring game and throughout the summer, and then just seemingly kind of disappeared from the face of the earth. The coaching staff, apparently the reason for not playing him is they want him to fill out his build more, which, after seeing the way that he played, I mean, he was in the right position, and he's tall. I mean, he's a tall corner. I think he's 6'2", 6'3". He used to play receiver in high school, converted from receiver to cornerback when he came to college. He has good ball skills. You saw on that tip, he was able to get up, get his hands on the ball. There's no reason. Like, if you have those athletic abilities and you have the ability to make plays on the ball, why are we going with the safe choice, the guy who you have film on, the guy who what he's good at and what he has limitations on, guys who've been around and playing games for 5 years and what you got, versus someone who just has so much untapped potential like Andrew Wilson Lamp, who, could he put on maybe 15, 20 pounds? Sure. But can he cover a guy and not get beat deep? Can he break up a pass? Yeah. Then who cares if he's 15 pounds lighter than he should be?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, maybe they're worried about injury, who knows? But at this point, I mean, we talked about it earlier. Maybe Neal Brown doesn't feel like his career is on the line, but I mean, at this point, I feel like these guys, this is do or die. Like if you lose out, I just don't see any way how Neal Brown's going to be brought back next year. And I feel like you just need all hands on deck. If someone is playing better than someone else, put them out there. Obviously, you don't want to put anyone in harm's way, but I mean, these guys should be able to play secondary. It's not like they're in the trenches having to, you know, take on a running back who's barreling down the middle. Um, I don't know. I'm with you. So if you are looking for a positive, the Longhorns offense seemed to be pedal to the metal throughout the entire game, which I do give you know, Sark some credit on that because I do like it when coaches just keep coaching. And he didn't seem to let off even in the second half. So I guess it's encouraging that the defense had a better second half, but that's about all I have to say. Overall, it was a horrible game by the defense. The Townsend game, the Virginia Tech game, that just gave us false confidence. We didn't think they would shut Texas down, but some of us thought they could at least keep WVU in that game. And, the game was over before halftime. So the only other time I've seen an offense just toy with WVU like that is once again Baylor last year. And both of those games, it's hard to watch. The Mountaineer defense just looked like they didn't even belong on the same field. It really was flat out embarrassing.
Yeah, and we talked about the missed tackles from the secondary too, and I just kind of want to highlight it real quick that we missed 12 tackles against Texas, 7 on rushing attempts. There were 29 rushing attempts, so I'm not sure what that fraction ends up being, somewhere between 15 and 25%. And then we missed 5 tackles on 22 completions, which is just under 20% of our tackles. And I know we had issues with tackling before in previous years. I don't know what the issue is here, especially when you have guys who, again, I sound like a broken record, but guys who have been playing college football for so long and they still can't tackle, or maybe they could tackle before and they suddenly can't. I don't know what's going on, but it's just so frustrating that we're missing tackles, we're blowing coverages, we're blowing assignments, and yeah, I mean, it's the same story every day in the secondary, and I'm not sure exactly how you fix it without trying some new guys.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta do something different. You gotta mix it up. Something else we wanted to mention, I mean, it's not that big of a news after a loss like that, but Preston Fox was on punt returns. We've been saying for a couple of weeks that we wanted to see someone other than Reese Smith back there. We were saying that the coaches need to hold Reese responsible for those 2 muff fumbles in 4 games. So I'm glad somebody else got an opportunity. We keep saying we'd like to see Jeremiah Aaron back there at some point, but to be fair, they have Aaron on kickoffs, and he hasn't exactly been doing great at that. In fact, I even heard in Neal Brown's press conference today that they're really going to highlight special teams, that they're just not getting anything out of their return games, and I couldn't agree more. We haven't had one good kickoff, one good punt return. Throughout the year that I can remember. So, it's not big news, but it's something we thought we would mention. If this was a WVU win, it would probably be worth talking about more, but we got bigger problems than who's receiving the punts. But like we said, we were just happy to see someone else getting an opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, it's the accountability thing, and you like seeing it, especially after you're not seeing it really. Again, broken record. There's no accountability in the secondary. We finally got to see someone held accountable and lose their job. So 1 out of 25, 26 starters have been held accountable. So hopefully that train keeps on rolling and we get some, starters changed across the formations and hopefully better play throughout the season. But not holding my breath.
Yeah, I wouldn't. So the last thing we want to talk about is Gina Smith. Hard to ignore this news. Gina Smith has been playing very, very well through the first 4 games. of this NFL season. He's thrown for over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns with just 2 picks. And but the biggest news is he has 77.3% completion percentage, which is the highest completion percentage through the first 4 games of an NFL season in history. Of course, minimum of 125 pass attempts. So great news for Gino. I mean, the Seahawks are 2-2, which doesn't sound great, but any of you who are NFL fans, you know that the Seahawks were being talked about as being the worst team heading into the NFL season, and he's got him at 500, and he's playing well. So that's great to see, because it's not like Gino's in his second year. He has been around for a while, and it's not too often you see NFL guys getting big opportunities. And what is it? His like 8th year in the NFL, I think now, and he's starting to emerge as a starting quarterback.
Trade Kenny for Gino Smith.
Yeah, your boy Kenny Pickett finally got in the game, and you know what? He had 3 picks, but I didn't hate his performance. At least he was able to score, unlike Mitch Trubisky. My God, he's hard to watch.
I want to root for a Mountaineer, not a Panther.
I can't really argue with that. Yeah. But big shout out to Gino. We're just happy for him. He gave us so many great memories as a Mountaineer. It's good to see him have success in the NFL.
Yeah, I think the NFL doesn't have a most improved player award. I know basically every other sport does. It's weird. But if they did, I definitely think Gino should, seriously be in the conversation for it, because, man, I mean, his career has been hard. I mean, he started out with the Jets with Rex Ryan. He got his jaw broken, partially because he was being an asshole, but still, it is what it is. He played for a couple other teams, bounced around. I mean, it's great that he stuck around as a backup, as I think a lot of people say. Backup quarterback is the best job in the NFL, but he didn't rest on his laurels. He went to work every day. He tried to improve, and you can definitely see his improvement. I mean, you don't get to 78% completion percentage by just, sitting back and watching those backup quarterbacks paychecks hit your bank account. He wanted the job. He could sit back and let Drew Lock win that starting job in Seattle. He didn't. And I've been super impressed. I mean, do I think that he's a top 10 quarterback? No. But, I mean, has he proven that maybe he deserves a second chance for a team who just wants a average quarterback? Yeah. I mean, maybe he can be the Indianapolis Colts' starting quarterback next year. I mean, that's kind of their thing. It's just rotating quarterbacks. So I hope it works out for him. And I hope that, this is a career renaissance for him, because even though I think he is like 30 or 31, he still has enough time to get a few more good seasons under his belt. Kind of like Mark Bulger, who didn't start for quite a few years for the Rams and then had several really, really good seasons after, Trent Green got traded or signed with the Chiefs, maybe. I forget exactly what the scenario was. But
Kurt Warner, too.
That's right. Kurt Warner, too. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then Bulger had a really nice, solid run of years. I think he won Pro Bowls, and there's no reason Gino couldn't do the same, because basically any quarterback makes the Pro Bowl nowadays. So I'd like to see him doing some skill competitions this next season.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. So good for Gino. And that's it for us, guys. We'll have another episode coming out probably, I don't know, this weekend or sometime before the Baylor game. We definitely want to dig into it because, hey, we're still Mountaineer fans. We're still rooting for them, and we want to know what we're up against on that Thursday night game. And like I said, me and Brandon will still be there, showing up, rooting for the Mountaineers, whether they win or lose. But hopefully we're talking about a win, because these losses are starting to get painful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Still, let's go Mountaineers, and thanks everyone for listening.
That's right. Later, guys.